Okay, so to start with today, a couple of you should have some timeline stuff from last time, right? Your absence. So who would like to begin? Okay, thank you, Bethany.
In 1781, the Iron Bridge, I can't read on Henry Home. Shropshire, England. It was the world's first bridge constructed of iron.
Okay.
Opened. Sorry, the bridge opened.
Okay.
1839, James Nasmyth invents steam hammer. It was built to meet the need for shaping large iron and steel components.
Okay.
And then, that first one, ignore that. 1847, a new law stating limited working hours of women and children in textile factories to 10 hours a day. And then, the last one is new law prohibited boys from climbing chimneys to clean.
Interesting.
In 1875, sorry.
Okay, so why don't you go ahead and put that one up there
Which
on the
one?
line, the last one, because Jessica got the other two for our last session. All right, Caroline, what have you got?
Okay, in 1838, Postcard Colliery, a stream flooded into a ventilation opening and killed 26 children.
Okay.
This tragedy drew much needed attention to child labor.
Okay.
When the Queen read about it, she had the Prime Minister investigate, which then led to the Children's Employment Commission in 1842, and that issued a report. They issued a report on mining, and laws were passed to limit girls and women from working in mines, which I thought was weird because it was children, so you're just going to limit women and girls. But anyway,
Okay.
and then it was hard to find dates, like actual dates.
Sure.
So by 1900, 80% of the population lived in the cities. There was no longer a middle class. It was just upper class, royal people, and then the lower class, working class.
Okay, so the middle class emptying out of rural areas by 1900. Okay.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Here's a little.
All right, we can go ahead and put that up there. So for next time, we're going to be sort of finishing with labor and industry stuff, and we're going to be starting to focus on women's experience in British literature. So our first readings in that will be from Dorothy Wordsworth's Al Foxman Grassmere Journal. So Dorothy is William Wordsworth's younger sister. So, we've already seen her we already met her as a character in Lines Composed Above Tintern Abbey. We're going to be getting her own, view of her brother. Going to a look at William through her eyes, and a look at her experiences and how she is constrained by circumstance. So one thing I want you to remember as you're reading her journals is that they were not they're journals, right? They weren't meant for public consumption, as these are meant to be sort of private thoughts. So that's just something to think about as we read. You'll also be reading a short story by Mary Shelley called The Mortal Immortal, which is a kind of early science fiction story. Okay, and you'll be doing timeline submissions for next time will be on women's issues between 1770 and 1835, right? Okay, so does anybody have any questions about anything?
Is that in the green book?
That'll be the purple book next time. Purple book next time, yep. Okay. Then let's look first at the John Cooper Clarke poem, and then we'll talk about the Zadie Smith story. What'd you all think of this? What do you think of Evidently Chicken Town? Okay.
Not for me.
Okay. Well, why not?
I just not really sounded, and I'm not
Okay.
It just sounds pissed off.
Okay. Pissed off about what? Like, what does he seem to be angry about?
Everything. It seems like everything to me, like everything in town, everything around,
Okay.
everything.
Yeah.
You sound like me.
All right.
Everything makes me mad right now.
Okay. So yeah. Well,
Going on,
Okay.
I guess.
Yeah. So yeah. Let's just pick apart then the kind of the portrait that he paints of this place, Chicken Town. So first off, like just a little bit about Cooper Clarke. As you may or may not have been able to tell from his accent, I don't know how well you can distinguish British accents from each other. Cooper Clarke is from the north of England. He comes specifically from a town called Salford. And Salford is just outside of Manchester. Now you'll recall from our last couple of sessions that Manchester has been kind of ground zero for most of the labor issue stuff we've been talking about, right? Like things have seemed to kind of radiate outward from there. Whether we're talking about the Luddite revolts in the early 19th century or unionization drives later on, the Chartist movement, right? Manchester and the Manchester area, right, which is about right here in England, this really was kind of like the beating industrial heart of Britain. And by 1982, when Cooper Clarke writes and records this piece, let's just like that beating industrial heart is full of cholesterol, right? A lot of the industrial jobs that had sustained communities like Salford in the north of England have moved on to other places where the work is cheaper, right? And where human rights issues don't always have to be respected. The mining works and the coal mining operations are closing down in part simply because people aren't using nearly as much coal. And yeah, like this, once, as we noted from the Engels piece last time, like very kind of like economically divided area, on the one hand becomes a bit less divided, but largely by everybody becoming poorer, right? So let's try to look at this poem through that kind of lens, right? Think about like what this says about like the state of the north of England and the industrial north of England in the early 1980s, right? So what word do you note keeps repeating throughout the poem? Bloody, right? The bloody cops are bloody keen, the bloody keep it bloody clean, bloody everything, right? Twice in just about each line. Now, why do you think he repeats this word so often? It's a what?
It emphasizes this one.
Okay, yeah, it's a word for emphasis, right?
But it doesn't mean bloody, like he's meaning it as like the dam, right?
Yeah, he's not talking about like people literally being covered with blood.
Right. It's like,
Yeah, it's an expression of frustration,
like
right?
an adverb.
Yeah, it comes from a kind of it evolves from an Elizabethan swear, God's blood, which was a kind of mild oath, people would express in frustration, right? So yeah, so bloody here and its constant repetition is meant to express how frustrating life in this particular place is, right? And let's see if we can isolate the specific sources of the frustration here. So let's let's look at the first stanza here, right? The bloody cops are bloody keen to bloody keep it bloody clean. The bloody chief's a bloody swine who bloody draws a bloody line, at bloody fun and bloody games. The bloody kids he bloody blames are nowhere to be bloody found anywhere in Chicken Town. So what's this first stanza about? What's it concerned with?
Cops and then the chief not doing the job.
Okay, yeah, so yeah, it's about the cops, right?
Because he says the cops are keen,
Uh-huh.
and then he says the chief's a swine, and the swine's a pig, and so pig, cop.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, although I don't think, bless you.
Blame all the problems on the kids.
Yeah. So on the one hand, like, you know, the cops want to keep it clean, right? But they've misidentified the source of the problems here, right? The bloody chief was a bloody swine, and but the whole cops as pigs thing is it's totally a U.S. thing. It's not really something in British slang.
Oh, I thought it might be. After this, I thought it might be.
Yeah. I think it's just an interesting coincidence.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, that's definitely an American slang thing. But yeah, so the problem here is that the chief is blaming kids who don't exist, right, for the problems in the town, right? Like, okay, this high crime, the high crime rate here must be all those damn kids out there, with their loud music and their
Like
long hair.
Scooby-Doo.
Yeah, exactly. I would have got away with it too if it wasn't for you meddling kids. Yeah. Yeah. And so when you have a situation like this in a town, like, where the cops decide that the problem is that the kids are out of hand, right? What then do you tend to get? Like, how does law enforcement tend to behave?
Towards kids, or
Yeah.
they're a little bit more lenient usually if it's a juvenile case.
Well, it depends,
Yeah,
right?
kind of.
Depends.
So,
I mean-
it depends on like the crime or the misdemeanor.
Yeah.
So if they're blaming it on the kids, then are they being really brutally mean to the kids?
Yeah, they're brutally repressing the kids, right? But unfairly.
Yeah, because they're not even finding a reason to what.
Yeah. The chief is just assuming that the problem is kids, right? So we gotta, make these kids follow the rules, right? The bloody scene is bloody sad, the bloody news is bloody bad, the bloody weed is bloody turf, the bloody speed is bloody surf. The bloody folks are bloody daft, don't make me bloody laugh. It bloody hurts to look around everywhere in Chicken Town. So what's going on here?
Everything looks depressing.
Okay, yeah, everything's depressing, right? The bloody scene. What do you think he means by the scene?
Like Chicken Town itself.
Okay, but yeah, like when you're talking about like a town or area having a scene.
Well, I would say the scene where the kids are getting beat or got to by the cops or whatever they're doing to them, aren't they?
Yeah, I think a scene usually kind of refers to a kind of like a culture, right?
Oh, yeah, okay.
So the scene would be like things like clubs, music, art, things like that, right? So the bloody scene is bloody sad, right? There's no culture in Chicken Town, right? The bloody news is bloody bad. The bloody weed is bloody turf. The bloody speed is bloody surf, right? What else can you apparently not get in Chicken Town? If the bloody weed is bloody turf. Yeah, you can't get decent drugs. You can't even get decent drugs in Chicken Town, right?
I mean, that's what I thought he meant by the first statement. And
I wasn't sure though.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like the marijuana and the speed that you can buy in Chicken Town are inferior imitations, right?
Oh man, it's not that good crack.
Yep, no culture, no decent drugs.
No good drugs.
Right? The bloody folks are bloody daft. Don't make me bloody laugh. It bloody hurts to look around everywhere in Chickentown. And this is this refrain repeats at least twice, right? You know, the bloody train is bloody late. You're bloody wait. You're bloody wait. You're bloody lost and bloody found, stuck in fucking Chickentown.
Yes.
Well, what's going on here? What does this refrain emphasize here? Why does it matter that the train is bloody late, and you bloody wait and you bloody wait?
Because you're constantly waiting and you're not going anymore.
Yeah, you're going nowhere, right? Right, and once you're here, you can't get out, right? It kind of like it's about being stuck. Right, you wait for the train to keep you away, to take you away, but the train never comes. And you just stand and you wait, and you get angrier and angrier, and nothing happens. What was that? Not a train.
I was looking to see if it was going to rain because I'm not prepared.
Yeah, I'm not prepared either at all. All right. The bloody view is bloody vile for bloody miles and bloody miles. The bloody babies bloody cry. The bloody flowers bloody die. The bloody food is bloody muck. The bloody drains are bloody fucked. The color scheme is bloody brown everywhere in Chickentown.
Sounds like my county.
Okay, how so? Where are you from again?
Oakville County.
Oglethorpe County? Okay, yeah. So how is this like Oglethorpe County?
Well, for lack of better words, it's just shitty. Like everything in that county is just trash. Like it's just, and then especially in county. Where's Oakville? Oh, it's 4 hours from here. It's North Georgia.
Uh-huh.
Basically, you see there's cows and chickens, and all you smell is chicken poop and cow poop
Uh-huh.
for days, and no flowers
Uh-huh.
there because it's just all cornfields, cotton fields,
Uh-huh.
or soybeans or something, or hay
Okay.
fields. And then, yeah, it just went the way.
Okay, so it's similar in being a monotonous landscape, right? Although I think what Cooper Clark is describing here is more of a kind of post-industrial landscape than a rural landscape, right?
I picture more like, so, I always compare it to shows. I feel like I watch too much TV. But if anybody's seen Peaky Blinders, that's what I picture.
Okay.
Because they live like right there by the docks, and it's like I think there's like a coal, it's just dirty. Like it's just a dirty street in Britain, and that's just what I picture. Their house is like a small little house inside in the neighborhood. So like they're all stuck together. So that's I don't know. That's just what I.
Yeah, and because everybody's so close together, everybody's annoyed with each other.
Right. And they're just they're just gangsters, but still.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
It's just sort of a tough kind.
You watch a lot of British TV, don't you?
I do. I like it. It's very interesting to me. But
You know, it's interesting too. Like, this poem is well known in the U.S. because it was used, like it was played over the closing credits of an episode of The Sopranos.
oh, really?
Once, yeah. And I think it's one of those episodes where the major characters in the show are contemplating being stuck in a set of circumstances that they didn't make and that they can't get out of, right?
See, that would be Peaky Blinders too. But they
Yeah.
a lot of that.
Sure.
themselves.
But yeah, so like the first two lines of the stanza, it stress the ugliness of the view, right? There's nothing to see here. Everything here is hideous. And then the bloody babies bloody cry, the bloody flowers bloody die. Right? It's it's noisy, the noise is irritating, nothing grows here, nothing lives here, except for my neighbor's kid that won't stop screaming, right? What's that? Well, yeah, I mean, I think if we want to look at like a U.S. version of post-industrial decline, right? Yeah, we can look at, like, towns where, the only thing left is like a Walmart or Dollar General, right? Like, I will say, like, since I moved here 10 years ago, this town has actually made enormous strides.
You live here?
What's that?
You live here?
Yeah, I walk to and from work. I live, it's like a 15-minute walk away, yeah.
I'm sorry, I don't know how you live here, because I couldn't.
I like it. It's a nice, but it's like, I mean, it has made good strides. Like Cordeal,
Yeah.
it's not.
Yeah. Well,
Makes me sad. That's
think,
where I'm from.
and I think, like, one thing that's happened here is that we've tried to start redeveloping the downtown and kind of bring that back to life, instead of continuing to build on the outskirts. And I feel like in Cordelia, y'all kind of done
We
the
have not
opposite
done a
thing.
thing
Yeah.
to the downtown. Nothing
Yeah.
gets done to downtown.
Everything-
If
yeah.
we did, I think it would be. So,
Yeah, but like everything gets built. Everything that gets built near the highway.
we had the interstate. Though.
Yeah.
Born and
So-
raised in America, so I
What-
can't understand why you moved here.
Well, for
It's time- it's time
well,
to move.
for the job. I mean, that's and I have a thing about living close to work. I don't like to have to. I don't like to drive more than I have to. So.
And you know how much I drive. I drive 4 hours back and forth every weekend.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, but you're doing it every weekend, not every day.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah. So I just want to kind of look at the next to last stanza here. We'll just jump to that, right? The bloody pies are bloody old. The bloody chips are bloody cold. The bloody beer is bloody flat. The bloody flats have bloody rats. The bloody clocks are bloody wrong. The bloody days are bloody long. It bloody gets you bloody down, evidently Chicken Town. So what do we notice here? What's going on here? Okay, yeah, first, the food's lousy, right? And it's all like takeout food, right? Pies and chips, and then flat beer, right? Mm-hmm. The bloody flats have bloody rats, right? You rent an apartment, it's full of pests.
Clocks are wrong.
Yeah, the bloody clocks are bloody long, or bloody wrong. The bloody days are bloody wrong. Can we relate that back to the thing with the trains?
Yeah, the train never shows up, and so the clocks are wrong. So the clocks are wrong, and the train never shows up. It just means you're at the wrong time. Because
And then your day's even longer.
Yeah.
Because work.
Yeah, so
Right.
the whole thing can, like, yeah, the thing that links all that up then is time, right?
You see no way out, so it feels like it just lasts forever.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, if every day is basically the same and you're constantly stuck, does it even matter if the clocks are right? So yeah, so this is very much a poem about the emptying out and kind of reduction to poverty of places like Salford. And this is something that is actually kind of like a live contemporary issue as well. I mean, how many of you have read about or heard about Brexit in the news? Okay, so what do y'all know about Brexit, if anything?
Brexit is the Britain exiting is it the European Union?
Yeah, it was about Britain exiting the European Union. And they had the vote for this in 2016, just before our presidential election, right? And both of those elections were taken as an unusual show of strength by right-wing populists, right? Both in the U.S. and in Britain. People were surprised by the results of both votes. Because it was the anti-Brexit vote was expected to win handily, right? That, well, of course, there are economic benefits to remaining in the European Union. So what happened, by and large, was that educated middle-class people in the Greater London area largely voted against Brexit, essentially the people who benefited most from free trade within the EU, right? Whereas people in places like Salford and other like kind of deindustrialized areas in the north of England, and a lot of fishing communities where fishing and water rights had become an issue with the EU, those communities by and large voted to leave. And it wasn't something that really kind of like cleaved directly along like traditional left-wing, right-wing political lines either. Like a lot of the constituencies that voted for Brexit had been, at least quite recently, Labour Party constituencies, right? So there was a history of left-wing voting there, but they felt that the benefits of EU membership were going disproportionately to London and to the financial sector, and not being distributed throughout the country. This does not mean necessarily that I think that Brexit was a good idea. I'm just trying to explain why people voted for it, right? And I think that a poem like Cooper Clarke's helps express some of that desperation. And that like a kind of combination of desperation and boredom, right? That living in a place that time seems to have passed by, where nothing ever really seems to happen, at least nothing pleasant, right? And where there doesn't seem to be anything coming, like anyone or anything coming to fix the problem. So I want to shift gears from this to the Zadie Smith story, which I think is dealing with different labor issues. Now, Smith is dealing in particular with kind of like the intersection between work and multiculturalism, right? So we have our primary characters in this, this married couple, right? Samad and Alsana Iqbal. Right, the year is 1975, and they are newly emigrated from Bangladesh. So they're South Asian Muslims. And once they're there in London, what does Samad do for a living?
He's a waiter.
Yeah, he works as a waiter, right?
But he's not a waiter.
But he is not a waiter. How do we know he's not a waiter?
Because he says it about him. He just does it a lot.
Yes. Yeah, he seems to be like annoyed about having to work for his cousin in this restaurant in this touristy area, Leicester Park. So if you look on page 1239, right? It took the Iqbals a year to get to Willesden High Road, a year of mercilessly hard graft to make the momentous move from the wrong side of Whitechapel to the right side of Willesden, or to the wrong side of Willesden. A year's worth of Alsana banging away at the old Singer machine that sat in the kitchen, sewing together pieces of black plastic for a shop called Domination in Soho. Many were the nights Alsana would hold up a piece of clothing she had just made, following the plan she was given, and wonder what on earth it was. A year's worth of Samad slowly inclining his head at exactly the correct deferential angle, pencil in his right hand, notepad in his left, listening to the appalling pronunciation of the British, Spanish, American, French, Australian. Go buy Elo Saab, please. Chicken jail fritzi with chips, thanks. From 6 in the evening until 4 in the morning was work, and the rest was sleep. Sleep without pause, until daylight was rare and was as rare as a decent tip. For what is the point, Samad would think, pushing aside 2 mints and a receipt to find 15 pence? What is the point of tipping a man the same amount you would throw in a fountain to chase a wish? But before the illegal thought of folding the 15 pence discreetly in his napkin had a chance to form, Mukul Ardashir Mukul, who ran the palace and whose wiry frame paced the restaurant, one benevolent eye on the customers, one ever watchful eye on the staff, Ardashir Mukul was upon him. So, he finds a job in an Indian restaurant that his cousin runs in Leicester Park, right? And what's his attitude towards the customers of this restaurant? What do we notice even just about the way the customers order? They're ordering Indian food, right? But what do they want with it?
Fries.
Yeah, they want, yeah. I want this Indian chicken. I want this Indian chicken curry, right? But I want it with fries, thanks. So he has to kind of kowtow to people whom he regards as culturally ignorant, right? Plus his cousin, who was always watching to make sure he doesn't pocket any tips on the sly, because they're all supposed to go in the common pot, right? And there's an interesting passage. We look on page 1240. Right, and that's what it was like most nights. Abuse from Shiva and the others, right? Shiva being the handsome young waiter who gets most of the tips and is mad about having to share. Condescension from Ardashir, never seeing Alsana, never seeing the sun, clutching 15 pence and then releasing it, wanting desperately to be wearing a sign, a large white placard that said, "I am not a waiter." That is, I am a waiter, but not just a waiter. I have been a student, a scientist, a soldier. My wife is called Alsana. We live in East London, but we would like to move north. I am a Muslim, but Allah has forsaken me, or I have forsaken Allah. I'm not sure. I have an English friend, Archie, and others. I am 49, but women still turn in the street sometimes. So,
That made me giggle.
I know, it's, yeah.
Poor guy.
But why does he want to wear the placard? Like, what does he want recognized?
That he's not a waiter and that he's this and he's that. He's more than just what they see.
It's not
Yeah.
just a nobody.
Yeah,
He wants people to notice.
yeah. It's like I'm a person, right? You know, I'm not just somebody who takes your order and brings your chicken curry with chips. Yeah, he wants to be recognized as a full-rounded person, right? Which is something that doesn't seem to be possible in his job, right? Now, I think one thing that is also important to note about Samad's story, because it's the story of a lot of immigrants to Britain from the 40s through the 70s. How did he and Archie Jones get to be friends? How do they know each other? How does he have an English friend and English connections? If we look back to the very beginning of the story,
Oh, going back to the Second World War. Oh, they must have fought together.
yeah. So Samad fought in the British Army in the Second World War, right? He and Archie Jones were in a hot and claustrophobic Churchill tank in which they sat side by side for 3 months, close enough to smell each other and to recognize those scents 30 years later when Samad emerged from Gate 12 Heathrow, right? So, the reason for this, right, the reason this is mentioned particularly, right, is so India by 1975 and Bangladesh are no longer British dominions and haven't been for 30 years. But starting in the late 1940s, so in post-World War II Britain, there was, for obvious reasons, a labor shortage. Right? Not only were there a lot of young British men killed in the war, there was also a lot of damage done to British cities and to British infrastructure by German bombings. So they needed people to come in and, do a lot of the kind of work that needed to be done to get the country back on its feet, right? So what they did was extend an invitation. Initially only men, preferably single men, from throughout the British Empire to live and work in Britain. Right, so the idea being that, if you were a citizen of a British dominion outside of the UK, you could move to Britain and were entitled to a job and a place to live, right? That was how this was supposed to work in principle. In practice, the men who came to Britain often found themselves discriminated against, kept out of jobs, and sometimes attacked by gangs of racist youth, right? So, for example, this story mentions a couple of times the National Front. And the National Front was a British neo-Nazi organization that was big in the 1970s. So they mentioned that when the Iqbals lived in Whitechapel, there were NFUs who came and kicked in their windows with steel-capped boots. So the National Front and other skinhead groups were often targeted South Asian and Caribbean immigrants particularly. And those two kinds of identities intersect here in this story, right? Because the Iqbals are from Bangladesh, right? They're Bengali. And Archie Jones's wife, Clara, is from the West Indies. Right? Archie is white, but his wife is Afro-Caribbean.
So when you say skinhead, do you mean like military kind of?
The National Front youth, they were often kind of paramilitary.
Yeah.
Like they often organized themselves that way and kind of dressed that way. Right?
Yeah.
Like, think more like militias than like actual military.
But the Kane militia, they organize themselves like an army. But anyway.
Well, not
More organized.
Yeah, actually pretty violent, pretty scary. Yeah. But yeah, the typical uniform was a shaved head and big heavy steel cap boots.
Some gangsters.
Really, yeah. That's they were essentially gangs. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, we were talking a little bit about, we were talking about John Cooper Clarke, who had no association with any of this sort of thing. But there was an offshoot of the punk movement, which Cooper Clarke was associated with. There was an offshoot of the punk movement that was like specifically a hard right reactionary skinhead. For example, there was the best known band who were associated with the National Front were called Screwdriver. And yeah, I mean, like their music is like, well, one, amateurish and bad, but also just like full of like vile racist epithets. Really, really nasty stuff.
But that was the time where gangs were really getting started, right?
Yeah, 60s and I think in the 60s in Britain, there's a big gang presence in London. I think, yeah, in the 70s, I think there are a lot more like youth gangs. Like I think like the Peaky Blinders kind of gang is more the kind of mid-century, almost more like mafia.
Right.
Sort of thing.
It is just like the mafia.
Yeah. Things like I don't know if I've never actually seen the show, but like, does it mention the Cray Brothers at all?
I think so.
Okay, yeah. The Cray Brothers were Ronnie and Reginald Cray were like two. They presented themselves as nightclub owners.
Yeah.
But
It does. It has them.
That they were twins. Yeah.
Yeah, they were in London.
Yeah.
Yes, because they weren't around them, but they did go over.
Yeah, and they were friends with rock stars and with politicians.
Yeah.
Extremely well connected. Yeah. But I digress.
Yeah.
But yeah, so where was I going with all this?
Sorry.
It's okay, no. So I think one of the things that this story shows, though, is that the barriers to assimilation into British society for the immigrant in the 1970s aren't solely unwelcoming white people, right? That I think there are other issues here. Like, for example, if we even think about this guy, Ardeshir McCool, who runs the restaurant that Samad works at, how does Samad get this job? Yeah, Ardeshir is his cousin. And in fact, with the exception of, the young, good-looking Shiva, all of the people who work in the restaurant are related to Ardeshir in some way. And he pays them all shit, right? So, even like this family connection, right? This use of the family connection to try to discourage people from, say, asking for fair wages or things like that, right? So we have here a family exploiting family.
And he's clearly very humble.
Who, Ardeshir? Yeah, I mean, we have like this scene between the two men, right, where Samad has come to ask Ardeshir for a raise because he wants to move to a safer neighborhood, and Ardeshir turns the conversation around to his problems, right, and how the butcher he buys his meat from, who is also his brother-in-law, is demanding more money from him, and how dare he, right?
Yeah.
How dare my brother-in-law ask me for more money, just like you're doing, cousin, right?
And he's sitting there doing paperclip in his hand to his name.
Yeah, he's forming his initials with paper clips. Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
So it's like he's just very big.
Yes. Don't mistake me, Samad, right? We are both intelligent, frank men, and I think I can speak frankly. I know you're not a fucking waiter, he whispered the expletive and smiled indulgently after it, as if it were a naughty private thing that brought them close together. I see your position, of course I do, but you must understand mine. If I made allowances for every relative I'd employ, I'd be walking around like bloody Mr. Gandhi, without a pot to piss in, spinning my thread by the light of the moon. An example at this very moment, that wastrel fat Elvis brother-in-law of mine, Hussein Ishmael, the butcher demands that I should raise the price I pay for his stinking meat. But Ardashir, we are brothers-in-law, he is saying to me. And I am saying to him, but Mohammed, this is retail, right? So the business relationship is more important than the family relationship. Now, I think that this also kind of makes, like, there's an interesting contrast here as well between the recent immigrant, right, and the one who's been in the country longer and has had more time to assimilate and get the lay of the land, right? That Ardashir's values have arguably become more British over time, and not in a good way, right? But if we compare this then to the other assimilated British Indian that we see in the story, we have Alsana's niece, Nina, right, whom Alsana refers to as niece of shame. Why did she call Nina niece of shame?
Because she's just going crazy.
Uh-huh. Well, I mean,
A
from...
little modern.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, from a Western standpoint, right? Alsana looks like the more eccentric of the two women, right? But from Alsana's point of view, right? Nina, because she's, she doesn't cover up in public. She just dresses in British clothes. She uses vulgar language sometimes, right? Because Nina is assimilated. Nina is the niece of shame, right? Although the relationship between the two of them is not exploitative in the way that the relationship between Ardashir and Samad is, right? That, they argue, right? But they still sit in the park eating samosas together. So let's look at some of their conversation. Right, the biggest thing that they seem to disagree about is marriage, right? Family relationships, right? Nina has got some feminist ideas and some notions about romantic compatibility, right? And let's go to page 1246. Or 1245, right? In response, niece of shame bats her voluminous eyelashes, wraps her college scarf round her head like Purda, and says, "Oh yes, auntie, yes, the little submissive Indian woman. You don't talk to him, he talks at you. You scream and shout at each other, but there's no communication. And in the end, he wins anyway because he does whatever he likes when he likes. You don't even know where he is, what he does, what he feels half the time. It's 1975, Halsey. You can't conduct relationships like that anymore. It's not like back home. There has to be communication between men and women in the West. They've got to listen to each other. Otherwise," Nina mimes a small mushroom cloud going off in her hand. "What a load of the codswallop," says Alsana sonorously, closing her eyes, shaking her head. So, a British person would say, "What a load of codswallop," right? But, as a South Asian still learning the lingo, Alsana says, "What a load of the codswallop," right? So we get a kind of hybrid speech from her, right, where she kind of mixes Britishisms with South Asian speech patterns. is you who do not listen. By Allah, I will always give as good as I get. But you presume I care what he does. You presume I want to know. The truth is, for a marriage to survive, you don't need all this talk. All this, I am really like this, like on the television, all this revelation, especially when your husband is old, when he is wrinkly and falling apart. You do not want to know what is slimy underneath the bed and rattling in the wardrobe. Nina frowns. Clara cannot raise serious objection, and the rice is handed around once more. Moreover, says Alsana, after a pause, folding her dimpled arms underneath her breasts, pleased to be holding forth on a subject close to this formidable bosom. When you are from families such as ours, you should have learned that silence is what is not said is the very best recipe for family life. So let me get this straight, says Nina derisively. You're saying that a good dose of repression keeps a marriage healthy? And as if someone had pressed a button, Alsana is outraged. Repression? Nonsense, silly Billy word. I'm just talking about common sense. What is my husband? What is yours? She says, pointing to Clara. 25 years they lived before we were even born. What are they? What are they capable of? What blood do they have on their hands? What is sticky and smelly in their private areas? Who knows? She throws her hands up, releasing the questions into the unhealthy Kilburn air, sending a troop of sparrows up with them. What you don't understand, my niece of shame, what none of your generation understand, but Auntie, begs Nina, raising her voice, because this is what she really wants to argue about, the largest sticking point between the two of them, Alsana's arranged marriage. How could you bear to marry someone you didn't know from Adam? And another thing to remember here, right, is that there's only like 2 years age difference between Alsana and Nina, right? They're of the same generation, just born in different places. In response, an infuriating wink. Alsana always likes to appear jovial at the very moment that her interlocutor becomes hot under the collar. Because, Miss Smarty Pants, it is by far the easier option. It was exactly because Eve did not know Adam from Adam that they got on so A-OK. Let me explain. Yes, I was married to Samad Iqbal the same evening of the very day I met him. Yes, I didn't know him from Adam, but I liked him well enough. We met in the breakfast room on a steaming Dhaka day, and he fanned me with the Times. I thought he had a good face, a sweet voice, and his backside was high and well-formed for a man of his age. Very good. So every time I learn something more about him, I like him less. So you see, we were better off the way we were. So, to the more traditional Alsana, right, what is the most important thing for a happy marriage?
Just to shut up.
Yeah,
And
for both people,
better or worse.
yeah, for both people to just keep quiet, right? That secrecy and privacy, right?
I don't think she was wrong at the, like, not then, not for how she got married.
Sure, well, yeah, I think, one thing that, we're discussing here, like, that we're kind of allowing for is, like, a huge gap in customs, right?
Right.
That, like, Alsana married in the way that was normal for a woman from her place and her religion and her social class, right?
She did do the modern thing that Nina would want to do.
Exactly, right? Because Nina is, for all of she's, South Asian by descent, right? But essentially British otherwise, right? So there's a concept that philosophers talk about called alterity. So alterity means always being the other in a pair, right? So alterity is the condition of always being the other. And this is a concept that is often applied to minority and to immigrant literatures, right? Because they're often writing from a position of alterity, right? Where they are the other in the culture in which they live. And I think that Alsana in particular, despite the fact that she lives now in a multicultural neighborhood in North London called Willesden, as opposed to the primarily South Asian neighborhood they moved from in Whitechapel, that Alsana and Samad are on the one hand always other to each other, right? Because of this maintenance of distance and secrecy in the marriage, but also other within the broader culture that they're trying to move around in, right? Samad has to endure daily tourists and people who are ignorant of his culture, thinking that curry and chips go together. And Alsana still thinks primarily like a Bengali woman, right? Rather than a Bengali British woman. And I think I want to point to the incident at the end of the story here with the neighbor Saul Josephowitz, because I think that this gives us another kind of good example of kind of this notion of otherness. Right. Page 1247. Are you all right, ladies? It is Saul Josephowitz, the park keeper, standing in front of them, ready as always to be obeyed. We are all going to burn in hell, Mr. Josephowitz, if you call that being all right, explained Alsana, pulling herself together. Niece of Shame rolls her eyes. Speak for yourself. But Alsana is faster than any sniper when it comes to firing back. I do. Thankfully, Allah has arranged it that way. Good afternoon, Nina. Good afternoon, Mrs. Jones, says Saul, offering a neat bow to each. Are you sure you're all right, Mrs. Jones? Clara cannot stop the tears from squeezing out of the corners of her eyes. She cannot work out at this moment whether she is crying or laughing. The two states seem suddenly only a stone's throw from each other. I'm fine. Sorry to have worried you, Mr. Josephowitz. Really, I'm fine. I do not see what is so very funny, mutters Alsana. The murder of innocents, is this funny? Not in my experience, Mrs. Iqbal, no, says Saul Josephowitz, in the collected manner in which he says everything, passing his handkerchief to Clara. So, what's he referring to when he's thinking about the murder of innocents? Think about the name Saul Josephowitz.
I guess the Holocaust.
Yeah. His name marks him as a Polish Jew. Right? Saul is usually short for Solomon. And so their not very serious conversation about feminism and about abortion has touched upon a very, very serious issue in Saul Josephowitz's own experience, right? Which he only kind of obliquely addresses with quiet dignity here, right? Right, in the collected manner in which he says everything. Somebody who has to maintain a calm facade, right? Probably to stop from remembering. Right. And he passes his handkerchief to Clara. It strikes all three women the way history will, embarrassingly, without warning, like a blush, what the park keeper's experience might have been. They fall silent. Well, as long as you ladies are fine, I'll be getting on, says Saul, motioning the cleric and keep the handkerchief and replacing the hat he had removed in the old fashion. He bows his neat little bow once more and sets off slowly anti-clockwise around the park. Once Saul is out of earshot, Nina says, "Okay, Auntie Alsy, I apologize. I apologize. What more do you want?" "Oh, every bloody thing," says Alsana, her voice losing the fight, becoming vulnerable. The whole bloody universe made clear in a little nutshell. I cannot understand a thing anymore, and I am just beginning. You understand? So why do you think all three women are so shaken by this experience with the park keeper? And by considering what his experience must have been. How was his route into England likely different from theirs?
He was probably living some concentration camp.
Yeah, I mean, he's there as a political refugee, essentially, right? A political and religious refugee. Yeah, I mean, my wife's family escaped from Germany in 1939. Essentially going through England. There was a British family that was willing to take them in for a little while, and then they went from the west of England to New York. But yeah, this was a common route. For refugees going to the United States, especially, and many of them simply stayed in England, particularly those who couldn't get to the United States because they only took a limited number of people. The other thing, when considering Saul Josephowicz' experience, is that even if he himself was not in a concentration camp, many of his friends and relatives probably were, right? So, this is someone who seems to be bearing his experience alone, while the three of them have each other, right? And at the same time, like what we're getting a portrait of is a Britain in which we really don't see, with the exception of Archie Jones briefly, right? We really don't see in this story much depiction of white English people, do we? The only white person we really spend any time with in the story is a Polish Jew. And we really kind of only glimpse him through other people's eyes, right? The community that the story is focused on seems to be almost willfully, multicultural and hybrid, right? That this seems to be, I think, because of the British future that Zadie Smith is pointing to here. One in which a Jamaican woman, two Bengali women, and a Jewish man all enjoy cordial relations within a park, right? But yeah, I do think, and I'm not really quite sure what to do with, like now that I think about this, with the kind of the general lack of engagement with white English people in the story. So if I had to go somewhere with this and sort of think through something, that would probably be the next step, I would think. It's like, okay, like why is this multicultural community still kind of just contained here amongst themselves, right? But I don't really have any answers, any good answers to that for you right now. Because again, like I just hadn't really considered that yet.
Did Archie and Clara live in Williston?
Yeah, they live in Willesden, which is why Saman and Alsana had moved there to be
That's
closer
what I
to them,
thought,
yeah.
but I
Yeah.
wasn't sure.
Yeah, well, and also because Willesden was a safer neighborhood.
Right.
Yeah.
And they lived there because it was multicultural as well.
Yeah, yeah, and you know, where the Iqbals lived before was predominantly South Asian, so it was monocultural, but it was the culture they came from. So they're moving from a kind of monocultural immigrant enclave into a multicultural immigrant enclave. And I think that in itself is kind of interesting.
That is, because I didn't understand that.
Yeah.
I didn't pick up on that.
Yeah,
exactly.
and Samad seems to be more comfortable with that than Alsana is, right?
Yeah.
Alsana seems to be more interested in sticking to her own people.
She did, but then she kind of seemed open to it once she was by herself.
Yeah, yeah. Well, okay, it is a nicer neighborhood and it's safer.
Yeah.
No National Front kids running around kicking people.
Better than kids.
Yeah.
But.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, twins. Oy. All right. So, does anybody have any questions about any of this stuff? All right. So, let me give you the reading questions for next time, and then we'll let you go.
And we're back on track, right?
Yeah, yeah. We are back where the syllabus.
That's what I thought. We were today.
Yes.
I just wanted to make sure we were.
Yep.